But anyway, I believe we are recording, so we can make this recording available both on Facebook and there we go, we're recording now. So we can make this available both on Facebook and on the MTPO page. But anyway, thank you for the introduction, Bill, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is the second workshop for the Kingsport Metropolitan Transportation Planning Organization Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. As Bill said, my name is Drew Gaskins. I'm with Gresham Smith. We are a design consultant based out of Nashville, Tennessee, working as the lead consultant on this project. Also want to give a shout out to the other members of the consultant team that we have on the line. We also have Casey Salvatore, transportation planner with Gresham Smith, and we were aided in our efforts by IBI Placemaking. We have Mary Catherine Kennard on the phone, who is our Facebook maven, although Facebook's not being very cooperative right now. But she's the one who's been helping us with some of the outreach efforts in social media engagement. And I don't believe he's on the line with us, but Patrick Osborne with IBI Placemaking is a landscape architect that's also aiding us with some of the more implementation focused efforts for the plan, which I'll talk about here shortly. But tonight, really what we want to do is take a look back at our first round of public engagement, which we did in December and January. And as I said before, we had a workshop in December followed by a 2-week public comment period, and we got some really good feedback from those that did participate. So I do just want to summarize that. We'll also show you where we're at currently with the draft bicycle and pedestrian network updates. And show you ways that you can get involved with providing comment on those recommendations, and then just preview what those next steps in the planning process are going to be. But just in case we've got some people either with us live or watching this recording at a later date who are a little less familiar with the plan, who might be new to the process, I do just want to quickly give a 30,000-foot explanation of what it is that the MTPO is doing. Basically, the plan is an effort to guide the development of bicycle and pedestrian improvements throughout the Kingsport metropolitan area, and that includes Kingsport, Sullivan County, as well as portions of Washington and Hawkins County in Tennessee and Scott County in Virginia. So it is just more than the city of Kingsport. It's the entire metropolitan area. In the plan, in addition to providing, I know with these plans we always focus on the facility recommendations, but we are also going to be taking a look at some policies and strategies that can support and better promote just a general culture and environment for bicyclists and pedestrians in the region. And so that's really what this plan is essentially a roadmap for the coming years for bicycle and pedestrian improvements in the region. As I said before, we've been underway since mid-2020 when we wrapped up, and we wrapped up that first part of the planning process, the discussion of opportunities and challenges, right around the end of the year. And since then, we've been working on the draft recommendations. So that's where we're at the moment. In this meeting and the 2-week public engagement period that will follow, is really a transition into this third part where we're going to start developing the final plan recommendations. And that includes those policies and strategies I mentioned, as well as some other implementation focused items. And currently, we are aiming to wrap up the plan and have that final plan document out in June of this year. But moving into the public engagement summary, like I said, back in December, we did have a round of public engagement, and it really focused around 3 key questions. You can see those on the screen. And really what we wanted to get from people is what kind of improvements they wanted to see. And to that end, we asked them to rate or identify the relative importance of some of the various goals and objectives of the plan, as well as some of the bicycle and pedestrian facility types or design solutions that they like and that they would like to see as part of this. We also asked them where they wanted to walk and bike, and we did that by way of an online interactive map. And that is also a way that we're getting feedback in this round. And again, I'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. And then finally, we just wanted to get a general sense of key factors in transportation choice. So we offered an open-ended question, and you can see it there. What are the key factors that determine if you will drive, walk, or bike to places in the Kingsport region? Because we really do all make that choice when we walk out our front doors every day, and that can be the factors that go into that can be everything from the weather to whether or not there's a comfortable facility, or in many cases, it's just simply a lack of options. And so you take the lone choice that's available to you, which is often driving in a private automobile. But we wanted to get a better sense of how people made those decisions. So in terms of the goals and objectives, and I'm going to run through 4 slides here. So you're going to see the general goal up in the top, in this case, it's livability, as well as the associated objectives with it. And what I've got highlighted in the red text on these slides are where we saw what I would characterize as a lot of enthusiasm for specific objectives. So here on the livability goal, you can see that there was a lot of enthusiasm, in particular, unsurprisingly, for an emphasis on complete streets, making sure that streets are a place for all users. Streets obviously accommodate vehicles very well most of the time, and sometimes it's a mixed bag for bicyclists and pedestrians. And so that's definitely an area that people wanted to see improvement. Another area was looking at opportunities for short trips to be made by non-motorized modes, which really feeds into that idea of transportation choice that I was talking about earlier. And frankly, when we talk about short trips, we're talking about almost most trips, honestly. The National Household Travel Survey has indicated that about 50% of trips nationally are 3 miles or less, which is a really good distance for bicycling. I think it's 28% or so of those trips are 1 mile or less, which is a really convenient walking distance. And then, of course, people were also interested in improving safety conditions as well. In terms of sustainability, we saw a little bit more subdued enthusiasm for some of these, but definitely a majority of people found all of these to be extremely or very helpful. And from a sustainability perspective, what we mean by that is just making sure that we're taking a state of good repair approach to the community's transportation assets, which has really been a national focus in recent years. Also seeking improvements that minimize impacts to community assets, and then just promoting investment solutions that reduce harmful emissions. And really all of these 3 things are guiding factors in our planning process. In terms of prosperity, this is another area where we were able to see a little bit more enthusiasm for some of the goal or for some of the objectives, specifically looking at land use and development patterns. So I was glad to see that people recognize that relationship between transportation and land use. And as I mentioned in the introductory remarks, that's an area that we are going to be providing some recommendations for local consideration. Obviously the MTPO doesn't really have a direct say in land use decisions. Those are made at the local level, but we certainly will provide some guidance for those municipalities that would like to beef up their land development regulations to better promote active transportation. And then the other one at the bottom, which I think we've really done a good job of through the planning process, Bill, is just promoting and fostering that environment of cooperation. And just based on my experience working on this plan and working with some of the various stakeholders in the region, I think we can almost check that one as accomplished. But that was another one that people wanted to see. And then finally, for those that participated in our first round of public engagement, you might recall that we added, so the first 3 goals were largely carried over from the last plan update in 2012, and we added this additional emphasis on connectivity for this 2021 plan update. And this one also received a lot of enthusiasm, specifically making sure that facilities, to the extent that we can, are suitable for users of all ages and abilities and consistent with best practices. Linking key origins and destinations, and you can see what some of those are: homes, schools, employment centers, things of that nature. And also coordinating components of the network with parks and recreation plans and other relevant land use and development plans, which I'm pleased to say we've also had an opportunity to do, both with the Parks and Recreation Plan, which I'll touch on here shortly, and also behind the scenes, we've had a good bit of coordination with the team that's working on the Long Range Transportation Plan effort, which is ongoing. So It again, just to underscore the collaborative nature of the process that we've had so far. So that's the feedback that we got in terms of the goals and objectives. The other thing that we asked people was just really presented with a visual preference survey, and you can see if you took the survey, these images may look familiar, and just trying to get an idea of what people would like to see. Unsurprisingly, sidewalks was pretty popular, which we would expect. A little surprisingly, people seemed a little bit more enthusiastic for pedestrian amenities like street trees and lighting than they did for sidewalks themselves. And again, I think that cuts to some of the land use and development regulations and some of those recommendations that'll be part of the final plan. And then in terms of bikeways and trails, you can see that separated bike lanes, side paths, and greenways were also really popular, which isn't wholly surprising, given the fact that people often tend to prefer, or the average rider, the average user tends to prefer facilities that do have separation. And so we're certainly keeping that in mind as we are moving forward. In terms of the online interactive map, you can see some of the feedback that we got here, and I know it's a little zoomed out. What I can say in terms of this feedback for those that did participate in the online interactive map is that this was really our first stop, other than the 2012 plan and some of those projects that haven't been implemented. For our recommendations, this really was our first stop at looking at what some of those needed to be. And so thank you so much if you did get on with the interactive map. And if you didn't get the opportunity to do that in the first round, you still have the opportunity to do that here. And again, as I'll probably continue to say ad nauseum, I'll get to that at the end of the presentation. And then finally, that third question, key factors in transportation choice. Again, we got a lot of open-ended responses, really about a good Word document pages worth. And so rather than trying to go through those individually, we did create just a quick word cloud. And I guess before we talk about the themes, if you'll just ignore the themes on the right side of the screen and just look at some of the words that pop out in this word cloud, you see things like bike, lanes, distance, access, destinations like downtown, neighborhood, even specific ones like Walmart. You can almost get a sense of what some of those concerns were. But again, just to summarize them generally, the four themes that we saw were safety and accessibility. So people just wanting to feel safe walking or bicycling, particularly along some of the major corridors. Distance and comfort came up a lot. Again, people indicated that they were more comfortable for those short trips, or would be more comfortable for those short trips if they had facilities that were available to them. Connectivity, which again was that new point of emphasis for the plan. And then I added this fourth one, network continuity, one that came up a lot and that isn't captured as well in the word cloud, probably just because people didn't use the word gap all that much, was talking about gaps in the network and the frustration that they encounter, when there's a small link in their trip that just isn't very comfortable for them. And so that was some of the feedback that we got in terms of those key factors. And before I move on into the draft, before I start talking about the network updates, I did just want to pause and see if anybody had any questions or comments regarding some of the feedback that we got in that first round.
Hey Drew, it's Mary Catherine.
Hey.
Facebook is up. If you will just check real fast, I think I can make it all go.
Okay, well, I'll take a quick pause. And we are streaming, Mary Catherine, so that should be, oh, it is back. Mary Catherine, do you think it would help if I stopped streaming and started again?
I do think that's what we're going to have to do.
Okay. All right, well, Mary Catherine and I have done that, so we have stopped and started the stream again. And while Mary Catherine's working through these always interesting curveballs that we get from technology, were there any other thoughts regarding some of the feedback that we got? All right, hearing none, I will go ahead and move on to the draft bicycle and pedestrian network updates. So before I actually talk about and show the map of those updates, and also I do want to pause, Mary Catherine, if you would, in the Teams chat, drop that link to the meetings and notices page that I sent you earlier. Before we get to the maps, I do just want to point out to everyone that we do have some larger plot layout maps that are available on the Kingsport MTPO's site. Unfortunately, these some of these larger maps aren't always as legible as sort of our classic table plots that we would bring to a public meeting. So we tried to replicate that, but we'll get that link in the Teams chat for you if you would like to take a look at those as we speak or later on your own time. But before I go over those networks, I did just want to briefly touch on some of the facility types that we discuss, and you see some images here of what those are. But in terms of dimensions, just some of the categories that we have, or the categories that we have, are shared use path and side path. So that is one of our categories. A lot of times these are also called greenways. So this is what you would associate with the green belt, for example. And here you can see, the shared use path is a 10-foot path, completely separated from any type of vehicular traffic, really what we would consider to be a classic greenway. And over on the right, you can see a side path is essentially a greenway or a shared use path that just runs parallel to the road. And again, it would provide a lot of separation from traffic as well. And just based on my experience at Kingsport, I know there are some segments of the Greenbelt that are oriented that way, but that's what we mean when we say shared use path or side path. Bike lanes, when you review the draft recommendations and when I pop them up, we currently just have bike lanes as a singular category. There are some various configurations of bike lanes, and we do expect to provide a little bit more specificity on what those recommendations will be once we wrap up our look at feasibility. But again, just to show what some of those bike lane types are, what you see on the screen now is just a classic 5-foot bike lane, which I think is what most people are accustomed to and probably what most people think of when they think of bike lanes. Some other configurations that are a little bit more comfortable and provide a little bit more separation from traffic that we showed in the survey are the buffered bike lane. So in this case, you've got your 5-foot bike lane, but with just a 3-foot separation from traffic. And oftentimes that separation will just be some pavement markings indicating that there should be that's not an area for cars. It's not a travel lane. It is a buffer zone. Separated bike lanes are essentially buffered bike lanes. You'll notice the little vertical separator there in the figure. This is often accomplished using plastic bollards or just anything to provide that psychological and physical separation from traffic. And finally, at least in Tennessee, frankly, a less common, but also widely used bike lane configuration is this separated bike lane, also known as a cycle track. And in this case, you would have two-way bicycle traffic on a single side of the street with, again, some type of separation from traffic. So again, when we talk about bike lanes, those are some of the various configurations that could be expected. We will identify areas where we think that buffered or separated bike lanes could be appropriate. Those final decisions for facility types, though, would ultimately be made in the design process, once you've got an engineering level analysis of constraints on a specific roadway or project. Another type of facility that you'll see are paved shoulders. In this case, it really is just a 6-foot paved shoulder. These types of facilities tend to be a little bit more appropriate and cost effective in more rural environments. And so when we get to the network recommendations, you'll notice that in some cases we do transition out to paved shoulders as we get into more rural areas where you do have much longer distances between origins and destinations. And then finally, we do have some shared lane facilities as well. And when we're talking about all ages and abilities facilities, shared lanes tend to be sort of a choice of last resort, just because it does mean that bicycles are going to be sharing the pavement with cars. But we do want to emphasize that shared lanes aren't necessarily the classic, Sharrow painting on the pavement. There are various things that various treatments that you can include. Most of them traffic calming in nature. So in neighborhood contexts, things like neighborhood traffic circles or curb extensions and bulb outs, which also work great in more urban contexts. Speed tables or cushions, I know those aren't always popular, but those in certain contexts can also be effective. And then, of course, your classic shared lane markings and signage, which when implemented aggressively and appropriately can help. But when we say shared lanes, those are some of the treatments that could be included on some of those projects. And so now that I've introduced the facility types, just as we developed the network updates, how did we do that? And the factors that went into that were demand, which you see up here on the screen, access, trying to make sure that these are accessible facilities and are close to where people would be able to access them, get on them. Connectivity, which of course we mentioned was a major point of emphasis in the plan, and then the last factor is one that we're still in the process of wrapping up, which is feasibility, which is making sure that we're not presenting the MTPO, or the MTPO isn't presenting these pie in the sky ideas that just have no chance of actually being implemented. We do want to make sure that the recommendations are realistic and can be implemented, with reasonable cost given the constraints. And so again, again to underscore the development of the draft bikeway network, we really started, as I mentioned earlier, with the 2012 network from the 2012 plan, and many of those projects have been implemented, some have not, but that was really our starting point. Upon which we went to the online interactive map, as I said, and started layering on some recommendations for this planning effort. And then finally, I mentioned that we had some collaborative relationships in the region. We also built upon and leveraged the Greenbelt expansion recommendations that were identified in the Parks and Recreation the master plan that the city of Kingsport recently presented. And so as I move through this, you'll notice that really anywhere that we are publishing these recommendations, whether it's here in this presentation, on the online interactive map, or in the final plan document, we will make a distinction between our 2021 recommendations and those Parks and Recreation recommendations. And I'll show you what that looks like. So again, we started with the, here you just see existing facilities, including a few that had been implemented from the 2012 plan. We layer on updated recommendations that we've developed. And again, some of these are from the 2012 plan that have been carried forward. In other cases, we extended or otherwise modified them. And again, this is where I think the online interactive map or some of the large plot PDFs that I mentioned will be helpful for your review. But you can see that we do have on-street and parallel facilities such as bike lanes, side paths, bike lanes and side paths in the more urban area. And as I mentioned before, we do transition out as you get out into the surrounding areas, into those paved shoulders. And then layered upon all of that, we include these Greenbelt expansion projects, which really do a nice job of connecting to some of the key areas. For example, one thing that we heard a lot in the first round of public engagement was better connections to Warrior Path State Park, and the Parks and Rec plan, I thought, really addressed that extraordinarily well. In terms of performance of the network, and sorry, on that connectivity goal, these are some origin zones that we used in our demand analysis that were developed in coordination with the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Organization. And I did just want to pop these up here so that you can see. I know it's almost like a connect the dots exercise, but where we do, to the greatest extent possible, try to touch as many of those as we can. So you can see those major zones all have some level of access to the regional network. And as I was saying, in terms of performance, one thing that we presented in the first public engagement workshop was this idea of bicycle level of traffic stress. And for those who aren't familiar with the concept or didn't attend that first workshop, basically what this metric is it I guess it captures how high your blood pressure gets when you're riding a bicycle along some of these routes. So the green and light green are good, and that's what we would shoot for. Whereas the orange and red are could be better, could use some improvement. Well, when we applied at build out those recommendations, so assuming that all of those recommendations were to get implemented, what would this look like in the future? And you could see a dramatic improvement, and it is where we're getting to those lighter greens in a lot of these areas, and where you are getting those all ages and abilities facilities. And frankly, some of the red that you see that persists in downtown Kingsport really are areas that would likely be bypassed by off alignment, either existing greenbelt or greenbelt expansion. But you can see what that looks like, in the future from a performance standpoint. Excuse me. So before I move on, I know there was a lot in a short time, but before I move on to the pedestrian recommendations, are there any questions or comments about the bikeway network?
Drew, this bill, I think it's pretty realistic that some roadways, and I'm looking at Bloomingdale Pike, that you have no shoulder and you just don't have a good environment at all for bicycling. But even more so, to improve it, to add shoulders or to build a separated path would be very, very difficult. So it's, in some cases, it just cost prohibitive, but in some cases it's not. So you just have to go with the opportunities.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you brought that up, Bill. That's an area that certainly we'll be addressing in the final report, but Bloomingdale Pike on our field review was really just a very challenging corridor for those that are familiar with it. But we do have a paved shoulder recommendation in there. So we, even in some of these challenging areas, we are trying to carry forward recommendations in the off chance that, unforeseen changes come up in the future. Just to make sure that we do have that on paper, so that if for some reason that road was ever, improved or widened for whatever reason, that would be something that would need to be taken into consideration. So thanks for pointing that out, Bill. All right. Well, in that case, I will move on to the draft pedestrian network. So the draft pedestrian network is bifurcated into two sets of recommendations. The primary sidewalk network, which, as its name suggests, are our primary recommendations, focuses on state and federal aid roads, specifically those that are functionally classified, and specifically the arterials and major collectors in the region. We also wanted to focus primarily on those segments that are within existing jurisdictional boundaries or growth areas. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't necessarily support sidewalk construction outside of these zones. But again, just from a feasibility standpoint, particularly with sidewalks, those are the areas we wanted to focus on. Supporting the primary sidewalk network is a secondary sidewalk network, which consists largely of local streets, those that are functionally classified as minor collectors and local. And these were all within existing jurisdictional boundaries and really were meant to provide connections to OD zones. And so these are, this being a regional plan, conducted by an MPO, obviously the state and federal aid roads are the primary focus, but we did want to provide tools and flexibility both for the MPO and the local jurisdictions as well for some of these local connections. And here you can see what that looks like. So we have the existing sidewalk network there in yellow. You can also see the primary sidewalk network there in red, and you can see how it hews to those jurisdictional boundaries, and in some cases goes outside of them into the urban growth boundary. And then some of those strategic secondary connections, which frankly are heaviest there in the northern part of Kingsport, but we do also have some strategic connections in Mount Carmel, Churchill, and just some other small ones sprinkled throughout the region. And moving on, and I don't want to forget, I also want to show our OD pairs here. So, obviously a regional sidewalk network is a little less feasible than a regional bikeway network, just from cost and where we typically locate sidewalks. But you can see that we did make an effort to connect as many of these as we could on the first round, and certainly we are excited to hear additional suggestions or additional destinations that people think we should consider. And so please get on the online interactive map and point those out to us. Again, in terms of performance, pedestrian level of traffic stress, same deal. This is, how fast your heart's beating when you're walking along some of these corridors. Pedestrian LTS tends to track very closely with just whether or not there are sidewalks at all. So you can see when we did it the first time around, the good or more comfortable pedestrian areas are largely in some of your legacy sidewalk systems like Kingsport and Gate City. And when we apply our updated network recommendations, you can see a lot of improvement there. So out in some of these other areas, you are getting some of that LTS2, much more comfortable walking environment. And along some of these major corridors, you see the orange there. In some cases, that's just due to the number of lanes and the posted speed of the roadway, but really approaching a level of traffic stress that would generally meet the needs of people who need to access key destinations like shopping, transit stops, things of that nature. And before I move on, and I'm moving on, before I move on, just any other questions or comments that have come up as I've been talking about either the bikeway or pedestrian draft networks. And again, do want to emphasize that these are draft. We certainly have not etched these in stone, and they are subject to change primarily based on the feedback that we get from the public over the next couple of weeks.
They might be over here.
All right. Well, if I guess that's a good segue, talking about getting feedback into ways that the public can get involved. So again, if there are questions or comments or thoughts that you have later that come up, we do have a couple of different ways for you to get that information to us at a later time. The first is the online interactive map. I've got the URL there at the bottom. We're also going to be putting that URL on the Facebook page, and it is also on the Kingsport MTPO's meetings and notices page. And so this will have all of the same information that I just went through in terms of the draft network. So you can zoom in to, I know a lot of times people have specific areas of focus that they want to look at. So you can zoom into your neighborhood or near the school that your child attends and take a look. And provide either linear or point comments for us. So again, jump on there even today. Do it as soon as we're done, and jump on there and let us know what you think and provide some comments. And again, we'll be monitoring that over the next couple of weeks. For those who may be more comfortable providing text comments or just suggestions, typing them out, there are a couple of ways that you can do that as well. The first is the Facebook page. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that, or encourage your friends, family, whoever to do that. You can certainly post directly to the page if you like. We'll also be distributing some prompts and just some topical posts over the next couple of weeks. So feel free to jump in the comments there and let us know what your thoughts are. Also, feel free to just send a direct message to the page. As I said, Mary Catherine is moderating our page. So if you do send a message, you're not screaming into the void. There is a person on the other end that'll be monitoring that and will get that to us. And finally, if you're more comfortable simply just typing up an email and sending it, we've got a general account here that you can use, mtpo@kingsporttn.gov, and you can just send comments there as well. In terms of next steps, as I mentioned before, we are pretty close to the end. We do still have some work to do. So obviously, as I've said a couple of times, we are going to be revising the bicycle and pedestrian network plans both from a feasibility standpoint on a couple of key segments, as well as based on comments that we get from you all. Another item that we're looking at are project cut sheets. So we are going to be developing on 8 projects a closer look at some of them, really just to try to breathe some life into the recommendations and make them a little bit more than lines on the page, just to give you an idea of what they could look like when implemented, and just to provide maybe a head start on implementation for some of those key projects. Also, generally, implementation and funding strategies. And again, those are going to include those land development regulation suggestions, some non-infrastructure recommendations, and then just some potential funding sources, both public and possibly nonprofit, that could be used in the future. And then, as I said before, around June or so, we are going to be looking to put out that final plan document. And so with that really concludes the formal presentation that I had tonight. Again, I want to thank everybody on behalf of the MTPO for joining us and spending some time with us tonight. And with that, I will open the floor for any questions or discussion. So if anybody, if there's anything that folks would like to bring up, please do.
It looks like Calvin has his hand raised.
Okay. And Calvin, if you are muted, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know what your thought is, or you can drop it in the chat box, whatever you're most comfortable with. Right.
Drew, you were talking about the different recommendations and also the Parks and Rec recommendations being shown a little differently.
Yes.
Was that shown in any of those slides?
It was, and I can go back to that and show you, Leslie.
I know I saw it in the stuff I looked at in the office, but I can't remember on here seeing how it was.
So here was just the base recommendations, and then layered on top of that in sort of that light green.
Okay, yeah.
Dash, you could see that. And again, it is a little bit easier to view on some of those larger plot layouts or on the wiki map. But yeah, we are calling those out separately.
Drew, this is Bill. The 8 top, I guess you'd say top recommended projects, they're going to, I guess it's sort of a half statement, a half question. They're going to use those cross sections. I mean, in other words, you're selecting a cross section that fits those 8 appropriately for each one.
Right. So what we're going to be doing is essentially providing that cross section to that specific context to show what it would look like in that specific environment. So it'll be less generic than those typicals that we showed. And we're also going to accompany those with some engineering level cost estimates for those specific projects.
That was my next question, is some type of cost estimate, get us an idea of what we're getting into.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Bill. We are going to be providing planning level cost estimates for everything. But for those highlighted projects, the cut sheet projects, we are going to sharpen our pencils and do a little bit deeper dive to get as close to the actual cost as we can.
Yeah, that's great.
And Bill, to that end, I've been coordinating with Patrick. We do expect to share those candidate projects with you, possibly as early as tomorrow, but certainly within the next couple of business days.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts from the group?
Hey, Drew, this is Jim Meyer with AECOM. Nice presentation. I was just wondering if you maybe have 1 or 2 projects that you're looking at maybe as a priority or see as a critical link in the system.
Well, that's part of what the cut sheets are. So I'm hesitant to share what those are until we share them with Bill. That said, though, I can say that one that we identified early on and that came really was also identified through our public engagement effort is Netherland Inn Road west of Big Elm. So you've got the current western terminus of the Greenbelt is right there at Big Elm Road at the river. And if you go up Netherland Inn Road to West Stone, you have a paved shoulder facility that will take you all the way out to Mount Carmel and Church Hill. And that was identified as an area of frustration for people who use that route because as they turned onto Netherland Inn Road from Stone, they identified that there were often a lot of close calls with vehicles and that really it's such a short segment that if you could make that connection, that you could really give users from Mount Carmel and Church Hill full access to the existing Greenbelt system and ultimately to the expanded Greenbelt system. So just off the top of my head, that's one that we encountered early on.
Great. Thanks, Drew. Appreciate it.
All right, quiet crowd tonight. Any other thoughts or questions, comments?
Just look forward to seeing the cut sheets.
I know that's the centerpiece, I think.
Yeah, plan your work and work your plan, and the cut sheets is working the plan.
All right. Well, with that, I am going to go ahead and stop recording.